Hebrews 11:8, by faith Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance. And he went out, and not knowing where he was going. Isn't that kind of like us? We were called by God to accept and follow Christ, and we have. And what's the end result? A promised land. We don't know what the journey is going to be like along the way. All we know is we accepted that call and we are moving forward step by step. Over last year, how many of us have heard that we're about to face our own exodus, so to speak? Mm-hmm. More times than I care to count. And it's actually been a lot longer than this last year. And so it makes me wonder, are we ready to face what is to come our way? If there is a true exodus, are we ready to face the things that the Israelites faced in their time? That original trip to the Promised Land speaks of Christ and the Christian. But as we know, we have times of victory and we have times of failure, and ours is that journey. I don't see us as any different than the Israelites in those days. When they came out, it is not always the Canaan life that is manifested in our lives, but it is what we are pressing into, that the life of Christ may be seen in us. Isn't it kind of interesting when you fail miserably? And it seems to be that's the only thing that other folks key up on. Well, I thought you said you was a Christian. And look at you now. Well, yeah. Keep on looking. Keep on watching. You're going to find this did not bring me down. I'm going to be right back up and pressing on. Just as the nation of Israel in the wilderness had failings and lots of moaning and groaning, God was faithful to them despite that. So first of all, I want us to bring out what Paul spoke about in 1 Corinthians 10, verses 1 through 13. For I do not want you to be unaware, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. And all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and that rock was Christ. Nevertheless, with most of them, God was not well pleased, for they were laid low in the wilderness. Now, these things happened as examples for us, so that we would not crave evil things as they also craved. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written. The people sat down to eat and drink and stood up to play. Nor let us act immorally, as some of them did. And 23,000 fell dead in one day. Nor let us try the Lord, as some of them did, and they were destroyed by the serpents. Nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now, these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instruction, upon from the ends of the ages have come. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands take heed that he does not fall. No temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to man. And God is faithful and will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with the temptation will provide the way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it. Paul is saying here that in the New Testament, that everything that happened to Israel is actually written for us. What happened to them is an example for us to learn from. It is written for us and for our admonition. Paul is saying that we should look at the failings and the weaknesses that Israel had so that we can learn from them. They are there so that we can actually grow in our faith and understand the character and nature of God. The New Testament always explains the Old Testament so that with that in view, let us look at Exodus chapter 13. Now, I really thought about, going through their Exodus. I didn't want to start with the whole thing from the very beginning where, Moses got called to go free the people. I didn't want to go through all of the different 10 plagues and all of that stuff. I didn't want to do all that, but I wanted to start where they were starting their Exodus journey. Up to this point, God had judged the nation of Egypt, and Israel had to apply the blood of the Lamb over that doorpost. And so that when the angel of death came, it would not touch them. When you think about it, what was that for the Israelites? That was their salvation. How many of us in here are saved? Go ahead, you can raise hands. It's perfectly fine. If you're saved, raise your hand. Look, oh, I'm saved. And I know that I'm saved. The firstborn of all the Egyptians who did not accept that promise of God to put the blood above the doorpost, their firstborn died. Everything, animals, the whole kit and caboodle. But because of the blood of the Lamb that was upon the doorpost of the Israelites, they were kept safe from this judgment. We see that great picture of Christ and salvation. His blood that purchased us by His death on the cross. So this is our starting point. His blood has been sprinkled over our heart and over our life, and now speaks of the new birth that has come into our hearts. We are protected by the Lamb's blood. So here you have that picture in your brain of a nation that has come into salvation and which is on their way to that promised land. Let me repeat that. We are protected by the Lamb's blood. We are protected by the Lamb's blood. We are saved. Our salvation is secure. And this nation that has been saved by God, and they're on their way to the promised land. But is it all fun and games? No. So let's look at Exodus 13, verses 17 through 22. Now, when Pharaoh had let the people go, God did not lead them the way of the land of the Philistines, even though it was near. For God said the people might change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. Hence, God led the people around by the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea. And the sons of Israel went up in martial array from the land of Egypt. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones from here with you. See, even though Joseph didn't want to be left in a land of death and the dead, he wanted to be taken to the promised land. He knew it was going to come because God had told him so long ago, 400 plus years ago. Then they set out from Succoth and camped in Etham on the edge of the wilderness. The Lord was going before them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead them on the way, and in a pillar of fire by night to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. Now we know that it tells us that direct route was to come out of Egypt and go directly north. Straight up, straight up. But God said, wait a minute, if I bring them this direction, and they see the Philistines' army standing ready for battle, they might run away and change their minds and want to go back to Egypt. Which we know they did an awful lot. Anyways, it didn't really matter.
Yeah, he knew what he was doing.
They were not ready to face battle. Think about when we as Christians first accepted Christ. Now, some of us grew up in the church. I semi-grew up in the church. I semi-grew up knowing who God was, and I was deathly afraid of Him. It wasn't until so many years later that I finally figured out the stuff about Christ. So when I became saved, it would have been a terrible thing to go up into battle, because I would not have been able to defend myself. I could be swayed. I could be twisted a little bit. I could have bad influences do what needs to be done to turn me just a touch. It seems like when a person accepts Christ, even nowadays as a teen or younger, that's when they're attacked the most. They're attacked by their friends. They're attacked by just everything under the sun. They're attacked by Satan. You really don't want to do that, you know. And he makes their life miserable. Sometimes I think they make their own lives miserable because they are torn between, gosh, you know, I accepted Jesus, therefore I have to be a saint. I have to walk around like I'm glowing in the dark. Because after all, the big old halo over my head should be seen by everybody. But then they look at the world itself, and the world says, no, 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 come here, you can't do that because you were raised X amount of years in a certain way. And it takes the time to wean yourself off of it. Now, I know that there's some people that were able to snap their fingers and that halo appeared and they stayed that way for the rest of their lives. No way, no how. Nice try. You've got kids that can sit there and go, okay, I was saved here at this church, but all my friends go to this church. Does that church's doctrine agree with what they were taught when they were saved? Probably not. If it goes beyond the bare minimums of what it is that Christ did for us, He came to die for us, to forgive us our sins. He was buried, He rose and ascended. And people saw it. Anything above and beyond that, you can damage a brand new Christian. If you came to Christ in a church that said your salvation is secure, and then you go to one that says, well, you know, you can lose your salvation. What would it do to that person? And I don't care how old you are. It makes you question. Because that new person does not have enough knowledge about God and their newfound salvation to defend themselves. So when I was reading this, it occurred to me that God led the nation. If God had led that nation straight into battle, they wouldn't have been ready for it either. For one, they didn't have no weapons. They were walking out with everything but the weapons. They had seen many miracles. They had seen God fight the battles. But they were not ready to take up that sword. They were a slave nation for 400 years. They were too new to understand God and had a completely different and God had a completely different plan for that nation. I cannot do this because after all, you do have free will. And I don't want you changing your minds. I want you for my people. Now we see in verses 21 and 22 that His presence was actually going before them in a cloud and behind them with fire. God was, and I kind of like this thing right here. Come on, follow me, and if you're too slow, I'm going to burn your butts. Get a move on. No lollygagging.
Really?
Yes, really. Bet you never heard anybody say that before.
No.
God was leading and guiding them the whole way. There was no map. There was no guidebook. In the wilderness journey, there was only one who was going to lead them as a nation, and that was God. And we know God kept on talking to Moses. So he's just basically his representative. Numbers 9:15 through 23 tells us that if the cloud remained over the tabernacle, then the children of Israel would not journey. They stayed put. They didn't move. They would not leave until it was taken up again. Then they would resume their journey. This was a continuous procedure throughout the time they spent in the wilderness. You get this picture that they were not doing their own thing. They were completely dependent on God's presence to guide them. And that is exactly the same for us Christians. If we try and guide ourselves, boy, we like to take them little twisty-turny things and get ourselves in big trouble. And then we got to scream for God, God, why did you abandon me? I didn't. I've been here the whole time. You just looked away. So sometimes I wished he still had a fire behind me to light my butt. Get a move on. No lollygagging. Pay attention. We need to be reliant on the Lord that he is before us, behind us, and with us. But we need to continually look to him to be the one who takes us on this journey. How many of you know how long that journey is? When will your journey end? Do you know? No, you don't. God knows. He's our guide. He is our light. And for Israel, that is the way that it was too. So the direct route north was the quickest way to the promised land, but God had other plans. When we get to chapter 14 here, we find them in a seemingly dead end. Now, I want you to keep looking at this whole journey as your Exodus. Even though you are a saved Christian, you know that you are saved, this whole story from so long ago is for us to learn from, to teach us not to do the same things. Exodus 14, verses 1 through 3. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Tell the sons of Israel to turn back and camp before Beeroth, between the Migdol and the sea. You shall camp in front of Baal-zephon, opposite by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the sons of Israel, They are wandering aimlessly in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. Some Bibles say that they were entrapped. So instead of God taking them on a direct route out of Egypt towards the promised land, he actually had them turn around backwards, and they came down south into this situation. When you look at Pharaoh, he is someone who wanted to enslave and entrap and pursue. We know that he is a picture of Satan in his ways. And he will not let those people go who have come into a relationship with God. When you accept Christ, Satan don't want to let go. He's got claws for a reason. And if he can get a single claw into your chink of armor, it takes a while. That's why you should always carry nail clippers. Cut them claws. Escape. His whole purpose is to actually ensnare or bewilder God's people. Egypt is also a picture of the world and its pull and its snare upon Israel. The world is just like here today, is a pull and a snare on you as Christians. Some things just look too good to pass up. And so you dabble. You think about it. You dwell on it. We will see more of this here shortly. So God led them to a place where they were trapped. And you have got to ask the question, why? Why, God, would you lead the nation to a place where there are mountains on one side, the eventual army of Egypt is coming after them, and the sea with its impassable barrier in front of them? Why would you do that? Where there's no way out. I don't know about you, but has God ever led you to a place in your life that seems that you don't have any escape? Caroline's laughing.
Yeah, you let me hear.
Oh. That's right. See if I call on you to pray anymore. Oh, okay. Okay, gotcha. God has led them into a place where there doesn't seem like there's any escape. And quite often, God does exactly this. He will lead us into those areas where we think there seems to be no way around and no place where we can go. Just like He did with the children of Israel, who would have known when they got the instruction from Moses to turn south that they were going to be boxed in. They might even be walking down that little thing in between the mountains, that little trail, and going, where the heck are we going? And came out that entrance onto that sandy beach and said, well, what are we going to do from here? There's nowhere to go. Mm-hmm. They would have been questioning why. So here you have a twofold trial going on. The first is that God is actually going to judge Pharaoh and the nation of Egypt. You are trapped in an impossible situation, and there are two trials every time taking place. One against Satan and the evils of the world, and another one that is actually going to build your faith. The trial is really coming Pharaoh's way, even though he doesn't know it. It is the final judgment upon him as someone who continues to pursue and enslave a nation. I can't wait to see the IRS go down. I really can't. Or the Democrats. Or some of the other evils. Or anything evil in this world. I cannot wait. The judgment is coming. God said it's coming. The prophets say it's coming. Man, I can't wait to see that. You've got this trial of faith for the nation of Israel. Do you have enough faith and trust in me as God to know that I can deal with anything? You saw all the miracles. You saw all the plagues. You saw everything that happened to the Egyptians. You saw that there were some things that happened to them that did not happen to you. Are you strong enough in your faith and trust in me as God to rely on me? And this is the first time they've had to go through such a trial. Exodus 14, 4 through 10. Thus I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will chase after them, and I will be honored through Pharaoh and all his army. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart toward the people, and they said, what is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made his chariot ready and took his people with him. And he took 600 select chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he chased after the sons of Israel as the sons of Israel were going out boldly. Then the Egyptians chased after them with all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and they overtook them camping by the sea beside Pi-hahiroth in front of Baal-zephon. As Pharaoh drew near, the sons of Israel looked, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they became very frightened. And so the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord, isn't that what happens with us? We are hemmed in on every side. We are facing a situation where we have zero control. We know we're in trouble. And we see we're being chased down. And we turn and we cry to God, Lord, Lord, save me. I don't know what to do. These people, the Israelites, now they have come out very boldly out of Egypt, and they're loaded with treasure. They have all the riches of Egypt in their possession, just as God promised that they would. And everything they thought was going fine and dandy. Man, we're so great. Look at us. We got all the wealth. We're free. We're marching along. And then we're here. Them riches don't look so good no more. You're not feeling so confident anymore. Further, it says that they came out with boldness. With boldness. With them heads held high, that nose in the air, and probably a strut in the step. Look at us. We're God's people. Yeah. Take that, you stupid Egyptians. So you have a picture of a nation that is flying high. They thinking they're so cool. God has freed them. They have come out. And now they see they are trapped. They look behind, and something is lurking in the shadows. And it's coming to get them. And it's the whole army of Egypt. Their first response is fear, and they panic. You would have thought, after seeing 10 judgments upon the nation of Israel, especially that last one, where Pharaoh drove you out, get the heck out of my country. I've had it with you people. And take your stinking God with you. They would have had a sense of faith in God. They knew what he was doing. They knew that this should be the exact same. They should have that faith. God, you know what you're doing. You can have the same mercies of God fall on you one day, and the next minute you're afraid of a scenario. You are afraid of a situation. You panic. You freeze. God backed them into a corner, and his whole purpose was that his glory and his character might be manifested. That Israel would see his greatness. He would show himself to be powerful and the one who was in control of what was before them and behind them. His whole purpose was for the nation of Israel, was that they would learn to see those things that had dominated them, did not have to dominate them any longer. Fear did not have to rule. When we get to the end of the story, the nation of Israel sees all the Egyptians dead on the seashore. They're across the other side, and it's really kind of interesting when you think about it, because I'm pretty sure that God had that wind that blew them dead bodies to the seashore that they were on, so that they could gather weapons. They could be mighty. I believe that God is always putting us into situations for that very purpose. Not to arm us, necessarily, but to build us up in faith and trust in him. To know that he's got it under control. We don't have to throw our 2 cents in. My 2 cents aren't even worth a plug nickel. It just gets me in trouble. He will bring about scenarios in our lives and back us into corners so that his glory and greatness may be shown to us. Psalm 106, 7 through 10. Our fathers in Egypt did not understand your wonders. They did not remember your abundant kindness, but rebelled by the sea at the Red Sea. Nevertheless, he saved them for the sake of his name, that he might make his power known. Thus he rebuked the Red Sea, and it dried up. And he led them through the deeps, as through the wilderness. So he saved them from the hand of the one who hated them, and redeemed them from the hand of the enemy. This psalm starts off with the writer giving a little insight into what was happening at that time. And it says here, when they were in Egypt, they didn't understand his wonders. They couldn't comprehend it. They didn't understand the purpose behind them and what God was actually trying to do. They did not remember his mercies either, and it says they rebelled. What did they do at the Red Sea? Oh my gosh, Moses, what are we going to do? We're dead. It's your fault. You did this to us on purpose. We would rather have been still slaves in Egypt. God saw their act of fear actually as rebellion because it was unbelief. It wasn't faith. They had come out, but they failed the first test of faith, but nevertheless, he saved them. How many times has God saved you?
More than I can count.
More than you can count. He saved them for his name's sake from the one who hated them and pursued them. In our lifetime, who is that? Satan. The writer here gives us a little insight into what was going on in the nation. Exodus 14, 11 and 12. Then they said to Moses, "Is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness?" How many times, you remember how many times they use that very same line? Why have you dealt with us in this way, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, "Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians"? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. They were speaking the language of fear and unbelief and not faith, definitely not faith. The first time something happened, they blamed Moses and they said, "Look, we just don't need this trouble. We would have been better off back in Egypt, as hard as it was. Why did you bring us out here to die?" Exodus 14, 13. And Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever." What does it mean to stand still? There are some principles that God is trying to teach us about when we are hemmed in and entrapped or backed into a corner. Moses' directions here are what God wants us to learn when we are in such a situation. Quit fighting, quit complaining, stand still. Open these, open this, and listen for God. That's a hard lesson to learn. Always has been. The first thing is to stand still. It means you don't panic, you don't flee, you don't run. "Ooh, I'm going to stand my ground." You do not try and sort out the situation by yourself, which is what we normally do. If there is anything that we can do, we try to do it. But you see, the nation of Israel was hemmed in here. There was not a lot they could actually do. They could hope like heck they held their breath long enough to swim. That's about it. But standing still means to give the situation completely into the hands of God. You know, it's one of those things, like I said, it's such a hard lesson to learn. And I don't care who you are, how old you are, you still have the same lesson that we learn over and over and over. And you'd think one of these days we'd get it. Oh, hard situation. Shut up, stand still, wait for God. Listen. It doesn't mean don't try and work it out yourself, but expose the scenario to God. God, this is the situation that I'm facing. I've got these ideas, but I don't see any good result from any of my ideas. Will you please take care of this? For God's glory to really be manifest, itself has to get the heck out of the way. Our attempts to fix any situation must be set aside before God can act. You have to totally surrender. And that is one of the hardest parts to learn, because if there is something we can do, we will do it. And just dig that hole deeper. We have to learn rest, to have faith in the one who can actually work on our behalf. And that's what it means to stand still. A really good description of this in Scripture is King Jehoshaphat in 2 Chronicles chapter 20. Remember that's a story where that great multitude of nations were bearing down on him. Mm-hmm. And the first thing he does is go before God and lay the matter before him. And he tells them what the nations have threatened to do, how they said they were going to wipe you out. Then the prophet came to him with God's answer to the problem and said to him, you don't have to fight here, because the battle is not yours, but the Lord's. God is going to work on your behalf. I want you to stand still. I want you to watch the salvation of God. And I was really interested in the last part of that verse. Because all they had to do was see the salvation of God. This means you have to be looking for God to actually do something. It is one thing to stand still and take a place of rest in Him, but you have to be looking to God to see what He is going to do for you. And this is what I really love, is when we get to Exodus 14 through 16. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. Then the Lord said to Moses, why are you crying out to me? Tell the sons of Israel to go forward. Get up and move. As for you, lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And the sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land. When we are hemmed in, the first thing we need to do is get out of the way. Stand still and rest in God. Expose the situation to Him and look expectantly to see what He will do. It does not, and when He tells you to move, you have got to move. Think about those priests carrying that Ark of the Covenant at the Jordan at flood stage. When God said to move, He won't do what needs to be done until you actually take that step out in faith. They were facing that Jordan at flood stage, and they needed to cross it, and it was until them priests walked out and put that first toe in that rushing water that the waters disappeared and parted. When God says move, move. What's that? That's right. Your butt would be burned by the fire behind you. Move. For us in the New Testament, what does that Red Sea represent? It represents baptism. In the same way that Egypt was buried in the Red Sea, Romans 6 also says that we have been buried with Christ in baptism. He took our fleshly nature so that the things that pursue us don't have to dominate us. Isn't that a cool thing? We've given it all up. Why should we be reaching for it again? Why would we want to go back? Our old nature has been buried, and we have come out on the other side of the water. We are raised in Christ so that we now have a new life. Egypt, the old life, and its power over us has been buried in these waters of baptism. This is what the New Testament type of Red Sea speaks to us about. Exodus 14, verses 23 through 25. And the Egyptians pursued and went after them into the midst of the sea. All of Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. Now it came to pass in the morning watch that the Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians through the pillars of fire and cloud, and He troubled the army of the Egyptians. And He took off their chariot wheels so that they drove them with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. To me, I thought this was kind of a really pretty good picture. And one that I just have to smile about. Because I have seen sci-fi shows where aliens look through the clouds and all you see is their face. You see their eyes, their nose, and maybe a mouth. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is what comes to my mind. The Egyptians are storming hard. All of a sudden, things start going difficult in that early morning hours between 2 and 6 in the morning. And the Egyptians got to look up and see God's face. A shadow of His face. Ooh! Oh my gosh, we can't do this. We got to run away. Their God is fighting for them. Remember, nobody's ever seen God's face. They will die if they do. Now, I don't know about you, but if I had been in the Egyptian army, I would be saying to myself and to my buddies around me, hey, I don't think I would have gone into that sea, and I don't think we should. I would have looked at all them walls of water standing up and roiling and see the dry ground and think, man, there ain't even no mud. I ain't going in there. This is not a good scene for us. I don't like the looks of this at one bit. I got this bad feeling. My gut's telling me run away. And I really don't care if Pharaoh's standing behind me. But you see, I don't think they could escape to begin with. Because I think God had them hemmed in. He had them hemmed in. He took off their chariot wheels so that they were unable to pursue Israel. And the ones that he did, some versions of the Bible say that they got loosey-goosey, so, try and drive that straight. You ain't going nowhere except getting sick to your stomach from all the movement. The Egyptians said, let us flee from the face of Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. Exodus 14, 26 through 31. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea so that the waters come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal state at daybreak, while the Egyptians were fleeing right into it. Then the Lord overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea. The water returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, even Pharaoh's entire army that had gone into the sea after them. Not even one of them remained. But the sons of Israel walked on dry land through the midst of the sea. And the waters were like a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. When Israel saw the great power which the Lord had used against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord. And they believed in the Lord and his servant Moses. Then God tells Moses, stretch out that hand over the sea. Ha! Close it back over them people. He drowned everything. So the judgment is complete. All the Egyptians were consumed by it. The glory of God was now made manifest. The Lord saved Israel from the hand of the Egyptians, and they saw the dead enemy on the seashore. Remember, this was a twofold trial, one against Pharaoh in Egypt, and it was also a trial of faith for the Israelites. God would be seen to be the one who protects them, the one who leads them, the one who guides them, and the one whose glory would be manifested. We have been saved and obtained our salvation through Christ, just like the Israelites in their time, only they did not understand it. Are we really ready to go through our own exodus? Are we strong enough to face the challenges and really trust God and his capabilities to pull us through those tough backs to the wall trials? Like I said, for the next handful of weeks, we're going to be using some of the lessons from the Exodus. Not all of them, because we'd be here for years. But we're going to pick and choose. And there's some pretty interesting things that I think we still face today that they did. Let's go to prayer. Oh, Heavenly Father, we thank